Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Friday, September 5th, 2025, and we start off with a familiar sight, which is the deflation of the European news media after another meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. I don't know how many meetings they have had now, but it's been a lot, and they make big promises. They talk about this being the one. They're going to get over the line. They're going to get boots on the ground. They're going to get more support for the Ukrainian military, and they're going to put forward. And again, they walk all that back because the United States will not support the Europeans as a backstop in Ukraine. So the Europeans could possibly put 20 to 40,000 troops in Ukraine. I don't know how much good it would do, but anyway, they certainly have been talking about that. We have someone here we can see our beloved Keir Starmer, who has banked his entire government on creating something marvelous in Ukraine, and he only can watch it fall apart. So we have one French government about to fall apart, and we have a UK government. So anyway, they are also collapsing, and so um, another pie in the sky article here is about from NBC News. U.S. could be um, watching over the buffer zone, meaning that the U.S. would be the backup to any security guarantees that the Europeans give. But President Donald Trump already said he's not interested in doing that. Um, but of course, since the United States has not been um, giving the Europeans what they want, they've gotten extremely annoyed. And so a couple hours ago, Google was fined $3 billion by the European Union for abusing advertising dominance. So here comes the fines of American media companies and American companies in Europe, since President Donald Trump didn't give the Europeans what they wanted. This was obviously timed to show the displeasure of the Europeans of what President Donald Trump had done to support their initiatives. So, anyway, let's get over to the front line here. And we can see this is the area called Zaporizhia. If we zoom out, we can see Ukraine. Here's Russia. Here's Ukraine. Here's the front line. So let's head on in. There has been basically no movement on this front line from Zaporizhia down to Kherson for a very long time. But in the area to the east of Zaporizhia, we're getting a lot of movement back and forth. We're getting uh, Russians pushing forward this way, and we're getting Ukrainians pushing this way. So basically, this is one big kill zone. So let me take this. This whole area is one big kill zone. Why? Because it's very flat. There's no trees, and it's very difficult for troops to move. It's very difficult for any kind of mechanized uh, equipment to move. So anyway, this area is being fought over intensely. But as you can see, if we move in here a little bit, we were talking about the advances of the Russian military by Mala Tokmachka, and we can see some small adjustments near Mala. Mala Tokmachka is right here. So this whole zone here, this is where the all the fighting is going on, and so this is an area where we're not going to see a lot of advance either way, either Russian or Ukrainian. at least for the moment. And if the Ukrainians were to move forces from here to another area, the Russians would still have a hard time advancing because of the drones. So anyway, this area here, there's a lot of Ukrainians. Let me just zoom out so you can see here, this whole area here. I mean, the Ukrainians are going to be pretty um, pretty anchored into this area. So what the Russians have been doing is trying to advance north of that area and to kind of swing around and try to create a pocket or a cauldron. So anyway, if we zoom in a little bit, we can see some. This is yesterday, um, near Yanvarsk. This is today. So this whole area. Let's grab this. This whole area is where the Russians are advancing. So you can see where they're going. Um, and if we move above this river here, the Russians were to this river, and then the Ukrainians pushed them back to this area here. So anyway, now the Russians are starting to advance again. So anyway, let me go back to yesterday. You don't see any here changes in the deep state map, but there is movement of the Russians here and here. So there is some advances. And if we zoom out again, we can see what's the whole purpose of the Russians pushing here. It's because this whole area here is very difficult. So all the Russians have to do is maintain this line here, and then their forces can kind of push through this way, and then they can create slowly start creating a cauldron here and then here. So basically, this area we may not see big movements in the future, but all these little movements that the Russians have in this area um, is very important. So anyway, we're gonna move on up to the Pokrovsk area, and we can see what things look like yesterday to today. There's very little movement being registered, but we know that the Russians are pretty much in this area here, and the Ukrainians are attacking Novokonomichne. So the Russians are trying to take Pokrovsk and then create a pocket for Minograd, and the Ukrainians are trying to move their oops move their way this way. Nope, wrong color. Sorry about that. Okay. So anyway, the Ukrainians are trying to move this way. Um, at the same time, the Russians continue to advance here and this area. So the Russians are advancing, and also if we zoom out a little bit, you can see that the Russians are all advancing um, east of Shakove. So where is that? So anyway, this is so basically the Russians um, are strengthening their position here, and so they're also here. So anyway, there's a very strong Ukrainian presence, and they are trying to destabilize the Russian advances, and so they've had limited success. But now we will see the Russian counterattack, and we see how that goes. So anyway, if we go into the Konstantinovka area and we go back to yesterday, we don't see any large advances. And so this area continues to be highly fought over, and the Russians continue to push in these different areas where they're making advances to try to force the Ukrainians out. As you can see, this is another kind of a pocket. So what the Russians have been doing is to try to push this way and then create a pocket, and then um, take care of that there. So anyway, the Russians are advancing nicely. They're holding their line, and they're also using their artillery to their advantage. So anyway, we can see here actually no movement, but it's been reported that the Russians have taken this area by Markove. So this is it doesn't look very large from by looking at here at the map, but this is very difficult terrain to advance in. You can see here is Chasev Yar, and Chasev Yar has been fought over for a very long time. Bakhmut was also a very difficult victory for Russia. They had a lot of casualties. Chasev Yar, the same thing. And the Russians would advance, the Ukrainians would push them back, the Russians would advance, the Ukrainians would push them back. But now we are starting to see that the Russians are starting to make more advances than being pushed back. So that is good for them. And so if we go into the Siversk area, we see again the Serebryanka. Here's Serebryanka, here's the forest. Now the Ukrainians are going to be anchored in this area. So they are trying to push the Russians back here um, to avoid the Russians um, taking the rest of this forest. So supposedly the Russians had announced that they had taken the Serebryanka forest, but it has not been confirmed yet. So anyway, now let's move further north. Okay, so we go back to yesterday to today. We still don't see large advances, but the Russians are doing well in this area, and the Ukrainians are doing well here. So the Ukrainians have a very good established force to the west of Rikolub, and they have been pushing the Russians back. We'll see advances of the Russians here by Novoselivka. And so this just seems to be the Russians are trying to fill this zone by Novoselivka, north of Lyman. And the Ukrainians, what they try to do is they try to push the Russians back in Rikodub, and forcing the Russians to switch their forces over to this other area, Rikodub. So anyway, but we do see that the Russians are advancing, and they're holding on a little better in Rikodub. In the past, they've been pushed back quite a bit. So anyway, let's look in this whole Barova pocket, which is starting to form. Are we seeing any big changes in the deep state map? We are not. So those lines are staying pretty stable. Now, if we go to the Kupiansk area, um, we see that there has been some advances of the Ukrainians near Pishane. Oops, wrong color, so we'll get rid of that and move over to this color. So you can see that the Ukrainians have a very strong presence in this area. And so the Russians, which apparently um, are to Kupiansk, to the city center. well, let me try to make that a little more accurate. So they're here to Kupiansk. So the Russians as of yet, have not started south. Once they start south, then the Ukrainians will be forced to leave this pocket. This will be also a long battle, but the Russians are making good progress. The Ukrainians are holding on, but anyway, it looks as if the Russians are finally making the progress in this area that they're looking for. Now, if we look at this area north of Kupiansk, we can see some advances for the Russians. So we can see right here, this is the area of the Russian advance. And so you can see what the Russians are doing. The Ukrainians were forced to move reinforcements from this area down to Pokrovsk, and the Russians are taking advantage to make gradual, incremental advances. Now, if they can merge up, let's go back here. So, if they can merge up these two areas, then they can start to move over towards this area, and then eventually to get over to this part. So, anyway, the idea now is for Russia to try to close off this large area here. So, anyway, this large area here, and so they certainly can do that if Ukraine continues to move forces from the this northern area down to Pokrovsk. So anyway, that was my report for today. So there were quite a few advances for Russia, some for Ukraine, and we saw bad news for not only for Ukraine but also the coalition of the willing. We saw a lot of false promises, and we saw the anger of the European Union taken out on American companies. So we should see more information and more advances in the on the front line tomorrow. And I want to thank you for joining me for this video. I wish you all the best. A very happy weekend. Take care.